everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
We have to retool the way we think about how we go to market when we go to workforce. I mean, it's been hard to convince companies and organizations, NGOs or governments, that there are functions that don't require a 4-year degree, and therefore you could take that off the job description when you post it. 4-year degree required. It was on every one. And slowly we're starting to see people say, no, I can draft it out where I can make it as, optional, preferred, or not at all. The other part is this resurgence of apprenticeships. In the United States, we got away from apprenticeships many decades ago. We've done internships. They're very different. Europe has been very good about apprenticeships. So we're bringing that model back. And so that's very important as we think about non-traditional ways to get people in. So it gives people more of a way to do on-the-job training, learn a trade, learn a skill. All of these things can be done in a much different and accelerated way because we need a faster way to get people into the job market and filling these job needs.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Larry Williams, President and CEO of the Technology Association of Georgia. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Scott. Delighted to be here.
So you served as VP of Technology Development at the Metro Atlanta Chamber before heading up the Beacon Council and Miami-Dade. And then eventually you were then recruited to head up TAG as a president and CEO. I wonder if you could tell us briefly about that journey.
Well, certainly. I think just going a little bit before that, my background has been in economic development. So really about how do you market and position the assets of different geographies and make them very viable for and attractive to other investment, whether it be domestic investment or foreign direct investment. And I've actually done that job in North Carolina, which is a great state for technology. If you think about the Research Triangle Park and a lot of the financial sector in Charlotte. I led economic development for the state of Washington out of Seattle for 10 years. So very much looking at what grows the economy, how do you grow an innovation economy? It was 2000 to 2010. That's really when Amazon was on its rocket ship rise. And then coming and working the VP in the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and the Beacon Council is the public-private partnership for economic development for Miami-Dade County. And so I give you that economic development background because as I've looked at ways to increase economies, create jobs, create investment, one thing that's always impressed me is how innovation really plays a role in all of this. So it's great to recruit companies. That's important. But it's also, if I think about other ways to grow an economy, it's about, it's companies that create the next generation of innovation. So if you think about it, in Atlanta, nobody recruited Delta, nobody recruited Home Depot, nobody recruited Coca-Cola. Seattle, nobody recruited Boeing, nobody recruited Microsoft or Amazon or Starbucks or Nordstrom's. They all grew up there and in their own way became globally dominant, Costco, for example. And so whenever I look at that part of the economy, that's what inspires me because it does lead back to job growth, how you grow an economy. And it's really about an innovation economy. And that's where we are now. And that interest really led me to be interested in leading a technology association like TAG that really does have a great sphere of influence and a good span of activities that help with the different policies and different aspects of what drives an innovation economy. So it might be a little bit longer than you're expecting, Scott, but I wanted to give that full picture about what the journey was and what inspires me now leading a technology association.
So, Larry, you brought some very interesting topics. So, for example, when we think about cities like Austin or Houston, for instance, or even Denver, Colorado, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have necessarily thought of those locations as a tech hub, but they have become tech hubs in many ways. And there's many other cities throughout the country that have become tech hubs. And a lot of that has been this economic development and this intentional policy development. But you also bring up some other aspects, which is very critical, is this notion of organic synergistic ecosystem. And I think you're essentially alluding to talent pool, universities, and then of course Silicon Valley is a great example. Seattle is a great example where you have all the elemental ingredients that allows for this incredible collaboration and ultimately innovation that birth new startups, new companies that become these massive S&P 500 Fortune blue chips at some point. So that ecosystem is very complex, but it's either organic, but sometimes it helps through some of this economic development that you're talking about. And then certainly on a global scale, you have nations or city-state nations like Singapore, South Korea, for instance, that have been very intentional about economic development. And now we're starting to see things at Luxembourg that's trying to become a space focused excellence center, for instance. So very interesting around this notion of intentionality and architecting some of these things. Now, coming back to Atlanta, 1996 Summer Olympics took place there. And I wonder how that really helped cement Atlanta, but also positioned it as an epicenter for this regional economic engine.
The 1996 Olympics was really a catalyst for what I think a lot of aspirations was. And it's always great to have a goal, something that we're all focused on and what we want to build towards and be successful at. And a good thing about something like an Olympics is it does leave a lasting impact. So it was a great reason for not only for people to get around the games, but to really think about what the future of the area looked like. So therefore, there were a lot of investments in city infrastructure. It was a great catalyst for a renovation of our downtown and our midtown areas, because those were very important locations as they are connected to both the corporate sector as well as academia, and a lot of the areas that you just mentioned in your summary leading up to this question. So those were very important times. It was also a great promotional opportunity. Let's really talk about Atlanta, not of yesteryear, but of the future, and a future version of what Atlanta is and can be. And it's interesting because from a technology point of view, Atlanta had already started doing things that were, what it was doing in the cybersecurity space, that had already started. And even though it generated some great companies like ISS and SecureWorks, the work quietly had already begun. So I think it was absolutely critical as a great inflection point and an opportunity for a community to come together and see what it really can be.
Super. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about TAG, which again is this leading technology industry association in Georgia that serves, I believe, over 35, maybe 40,000 members by now, with regional chapters in Metro Atlanta, Athens, Augusta, Columbus, and so forth, Georgia and Savannah. What exactly is it? What's its mission statement? And what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Good. Well, sure. Our mission is about pulling together the important ecosystem and things that really fuel the innovation economy. And we do that by connecting our ecosystem, how we promote both our companies, our members, as well as this geography. TAG by every measure is a top 5 technology, not TAG. Georgia is a top 5 technology state, and we get to tell that story of why. I'll circle back to that. The other is influence. So we do a lot of lobbying, we do policy development, both at the state and federal level, and then educate. What do we do to prepare that workforce of the future? And really, it's everything. It's the longer pipeline of STEAM, if you prefer, how we get K through 12, and we get this idea of career paths and great opportunities in front of young people. Everybody would love to be a sports star of some type, or a rock and roll star, or a hip hop star. What we like to point out is, even though you might not be the star on stage or on the field or on the court, there are great careers that are around those areas. And, if we think about marketing, if we think about, we gave a great example the other day. Somebody was talking about music, and I asked them, well, what do do you like Spotify? And they go, well, Spotify is great. They have these great playlists and things like that. So that's data science and analytics. That's how that's built, and that's how it works. So we get very much around both STEM education, workforce development, especially working around things that don't today require 4-year degrees, but can fill a great void in the high demand for tech talent that we need. And then third is professional development. As we get to this next wave, there are a lot of people, we call it the silver tsunami. So if you can see me on the video, people like me, we're going to be retiring soon, and we need that next generation of talent that are going to come in and lead companies or create or be great entrepreneurs and create that next generation of innovation. So that's what we're about. On a day-to-day basis, we're running events, we're connecting people. We are great networking events, both large and small. Everything around cybersecurity, digital health, data science and analytics, fintech. Fintech's very important to Georgia because about 70% of all debit, credit, and reward card transactions are processed through Georgia. And so it's a very, very important part of our infrastructure. We're telling this great story about Georgia and why it is positioned as a great technology state. Scott, I often describe Georgia as where technology meets the real world. And what I mean by that is we don't always have the shiniest new gadget or the trendiest new social app, but we're building products and services that drive revenue, probably more so than anywhere else. And it goes back to some of those industries that I just mentioned, like fintech. And we didn't get into fintech by accident. We got into fintech because we were really good at processing checks. I mean, you're a young man. I don't know if you've ever written a check, but there are a lot of people that checks aren't part of their portfolio today. It's not part of their habits. But we were very good at that, and we've stayed ahead of the trend. And so when it comes to transaction processing, again, that 70% data point has been very important to us, and we continue to stay at the forefront of that. To that point, today and age, 80% of all commercial cryptocurrency transactions are processed through Georgia. And that's just a way that we've stayed in front of the curve. The other anecdote there is around cybersecurity. We were working on cybersecurity, back when it was mainframes, back network, internet solutions for security. And then it evolved. And so if I think about, the brands like I mentioned, ISS going to IBM, but still based in those functions headquartered here. Same with SecureWorks as part of Dell. It also spawned great companies like AirWatch. And AirWatch was the first mobile cybersecurity application that Apple let onto its platform. It is in essence, because of that security function that they were able to add, it was a great catalyst of why people chose the iPhone over the BlackBerry. And so it was a turning point, and that was a great application. And the point of telling this story is that, we didn't stand up today and say that we were going to do this here in Georgia. We've actually been doing it. And so like in cybersecurity, we know all the layers of the onion because we helped build the onion. And so now as we go into not only cybersecurity, but what it looks like with privacy, as that becomes more and more an intersection of those more connected, we've got a great company like OneTrust that's based here and has become the global standard for how you manage privacy standards across the globe. So it's, that's what I mean when I say Georgia's where technology meets the real world. And so that's what we work on every day, connecting the ecosystem, bringing parts of it together, and making sure people understand what's going on here in Georgia.
So thank you for that overview. I appreciate it in terms of some of the sectoral focus around fintech, cybersecurity, supply chain logistics, and so forth, and manufacturing. And I think what you're speaking to is this notion of regional comparative advantage. So every region may do similar things, but they do things better, relatively better than some other regions. And those are the things that's inherent to that local region, specifically Georgia. And of course, Georgia, of course, has some incredible universities like Georgia Tech and many others that's really fueling this STEM talent pool that you speak of. Now, one of the things you said, which is very interesting, is Georgia isn't necessarily about the shiny newest things, but it's about the fundamental industrial, manufacturing, financial services, things that are really driving and have been driving the economy for many decades, really. So the evolution is really what we're talking about. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the policy side. So this year, there's been a number of bills or policies that's been passed that is focused on semiconductor, that is focused on really bringing more, I would say, manufacturing, production capability back to our domestic country. And I wonder how that is affecting Georgia specifically.
Well, very positive, especially when we think about electric vehicles, batteries. A lot of that investment in manufacturing is coming here to Georgia, and so we're seeing a great influx of people that are investing here and ready to build those capabilities out here. So if I just go back and start thinking about policy, one thing that Georgia has really been focused on, and I think this is really good, is really about how do we set a business climate that is conducive for the private sector to not only succeed but excel. If you bring your company here, what is the role of government, and then where can we let the private sector lead the way? You alluded to this earlier about geographies that actually are conducive to business. That's what we like to do. What is the role of government? Creating a great tax climate, a very straightforward tax policy that people can manage to, they can understand it, as well as what are the regulatory environment and the things where the government can really play an important role. So, everybody wants clean water, everybody wants clean air. These things are important. Companies, they think it's important. They just want to know what to manage to. And I think when we think about an industrial policy point of view, those are things that we put in place and make it easy to navigate. So when we look at that, and we look at the companies that are coming here, so whether it be a manufacturing plant that's focused on batteries and looking at what's going on with electric vehicles, all the way up to the important products of autonomous vehicles, both aerial autonomous vehicles, what's going on in the road. A great example of that is the products and the services themselves, but it's where we can test them out and actually learn from them. And we've got a lot of that capabilities here. It's also a confluence of what happens with when you start bringing in academia. And when you say academia in the universities, people often think of that academic, the students, the workforce pool. But there's also, these are research universities as well that are on the leading edge of new products and services and ideas that can be patented and commercialized. That's an extremely important part of what's going on here as well. And then connecting it also with, capital. How do we bring in the capital part that helps people actually get the resources that they need to be able to create that next generation of ingenuity. The other part is our corporations are very keen. So, it's great to have some type of capital or an investment. It's also great to have a customer, right? So a customer that can actually, develop someone's, balance sheet in a positive way that can make it more attractive. So when we think about the connectivity of the ecosystem, our public policy has been solid about what are the things that can either inhibit or be a detriment to industrial growth and for commercial growth. And we've been very focused on that. And technology continues to excel in this area. So we look at it as homegrown companies. Some of the companies that I've mentioned, we've been able to continue to grow companies. And Scott, I think you'll know, sometimes in a startup model, it's, sometimes it's scale and sell, but if somebody, scales and sells and, for several $100 million, that's a great thing. The other is, is companies that really grow up and be dominant and keep their brands and their global exposure over many, many years. So these are things that people are finding they can do here in Georgia, and they continue to do, and the examples just keep coming. The other is the influx thing, especially thinking about talent, or companies that really find that great business climate here. So we got Microsoft that has landed here, and they're building a 90-acre campus. This will be, equivalent to an HQ2 for Microsoft, and it'll be here in Atlanta. Cisco is building out great assets here. Visa is. Google continues to expand here. So these are extremely. FanDuel, if you're familiar with FanDuel, they built out their technology center here, and they continue to grow. So these are all important, I think, examples of why this public policy is really working for Georgia. And people, not only are they finding us, they found us, and they continue to come here.
So aside from just this favorable economics and incentive structure and clear expectations, because again, I think we've seen a lot of companies from California, for example, exiting to the likes of Texas and other states like Georgia because of not only taxation, but let's say uncertainties. But one of the things you mentioned early on is this notion around talent. And when we think about some of these talents, it's not just those that have PhDs or masters, but those that may have less than 4 years of college education. And certainly when you think about industries like manufacturing or supply chain and logistics, or even retail or Home Depot, for example, is that the traditional kind of blue collar jobs are changing. So even if you don't necessarily have a college degree, the nature of the job is changing. They're perhaps collaborating with robots, for example. They're learning to use virtual reality on their manufacturing floor, for instance, or their logistics or warehouse, for instance. How is that changing, and how are the non-college grads being prepared to supply the labor force that's needed to support Georgia moving forward?
Great question, and I'll just share with you. We put on a conference yesterday called Converge, and the whole theme of Converge is how inclusion drives innovation. And I had this exact conversation with two executives, and this just really puts a fine point on how important this subject is. It was an executive from Google and an executive from Microsoft were on stage together with me on a fireside chat to talk about non-traditional ways to meet the workforce demands that we're facing, not only in Georgia, but really globally, and certainly around the country. And so one is, as you mentioned, we've got great institutions in Georgia. People know Georgia Tech, people know Emory, and then there's some others that are known, but maybe not as well known, like Kennesaw State, Georgia State University, which is now leading the way in esports, by the way. Great cyber center at Augusta University. So there are lots of things, not to mention how important diversity is for our area, and how we've known about diversity and how we've been able to catalyze it. So really being able to really connect with the historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs as we call them. This is all strengths that we have in Georgia. So how do you do it? So one is really thinking about, job functions. So the great trend right now, and we're really, I think, at the forefront of this, is really aptitude-based hiring. So how do you actually start to screen people for their aptitude to be able to perform as well as learn different functions? And there's a lot of things that lend themselves to this type of thing, including cybersecurity, digital health. In fintech, there are great functions. We have to retool the way we think about how we go to market when we go to workforce. I mean, it's been hard to convince companies and organizations, NGOs or governments, that there are functions that don't require a 4-year degree, and therefore you can take that off the job description when you post it. 4-year degree required. It was on every one, and slowly we're starting to see people say, "No, I can draft that out where I can make it as optional, preferred, or not at all." Not required. So that's one area, is just making sure that we're looking at the type of functions and the type of skills that are actually needed. The other part is this resurgence of apprenticeships. In the United States, we got away from apprenticeships many decades ago. We've done internships. They're very different. Europe has been very good about apprenticeships, so we're bringing that model back. And so that's very important as we think about non-traditional ways to get people in. So it gives people more of a way to do on-the-job training, learn a trade, learn a skill, whether it be a service, whether it be in manufacturing, if we're assembling cars, as you said, alongside with robots, the cobot model that's being implemented in many places. All of these things can be done in a much different and accelerated way because we need a faster way to get people into the job market and filling these job needs before. The other layer is diversity and inclusion. And how do we really address that? And so we're going through a lot of prosperity. And how do we really help to get people, all people, across Georgia plugged in and connected to this great prosperity? So underserved areas, whether it be rural or urban underserved areas, there's definitely ways that we can reach out and make sure that we're connecting people and meeting them where they are. Meaning, you say some people just, would say, okay, well, it's hard to show up for a meeting if you don't know that there is a meeting and where the meeting is. So from the job point of view, it's important that we start to connect with people and let them know what these opportunities are and how to get engaged. Apprenticeship model works very, very well also because there are certain people that like to advance, but they can't leave, even a minimum wage job right now because they need that revenue. That money is important to them. So we've got to start doing opportunities for them to get paid while they're learning this new craft. And our companies and other institutions and the government are embracing this because they know how important it is. So that's just a few examples of what we're doing here in Georgia and how we're connecting the workforce. But it is, and quite frankly, to get there, it is our universities, and they do have a role in this, and they know they do. It's our K through 12, and we've got a wonderful technology college system of Georgia that really focuses in on this and how we can really start to upskill people as well.
Well, thank you very much for your passion. We're out of time for today. I've been joined by Larry Williams, President and CEO of the Technology Association of Georgia. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.